Welcome to Leadership Where It Matters Most. The family is the most important institution in the world. The future of the church passes through the family. The church has the greatest mission of any organization ever. Go and make disciples of all nations. The family and the church. This is where leadership matters most. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to Leadership Where It Matters Most. Today's guest is Harvey Sanders. Matthew is the president and CEO of Longbeard. He is founder and chief architect behind Magisterium AI, which is an amazing tool that I've used quite a bit over the last little bit and using it more and more, as well as Vulgate AI and the Christendom app. He will introduce to all of you all of these technologies, what they are, why they created them, and all that. So Longbeard isn't trying to create sort of, the technical term would be artificial general intelligence or AGI. Their objective is very simple. It is to build the most faithful and useful Catholic AI system possible, and then share it with the world for the glory of God and the salvation of souls. Magisterium AI is a very powerful tool, and we talk about that. Matthew introduces it to all of you. And then we kind of back up and at more of the 30,000 foot level, have a conversation around AI. And I present to Matthew some of the questions I would want to ask anybody that's in that space as an expert. Questions like, where is AI going? I ask him about the concerns that people have. There are a lot of people that have concerns around safety, around inaccurate information, and also concerns around the technology becoming so capable of learning that it starts to innovate at a rate that we can't even keep up with. So we talk a lot about some of those concerns, and frankly, he validates them, some of them. And he's a very trusted voice in this space. We talk about some of the moral implications around AI and many other things. It's a very rich conversation. I suspect that I'm going to have Matthew back on the podcast probably sooner than later, because this field of AI is changing and emerging so quickly in powerful ways. So I'm excited. I'll be in Edmonton attending a conference that Matthew will be keynoting at. I'm sure that'll be good. So enjoy this episode. I'm sure it's going to bring up a lot of questions. And if you have some questions out of this, get them to me. And next time I have Matthew on, perhaps I can ask him directly on your behalf, and then you get an answer. So enjoy the episode, and enjoy Harvey Sanders. Harvey Sanders, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
This is a conversation I'm really looking forward to with artificial intelligence, AI. But before we jump into all that, you've got quite a diverse background. So I'm hoping you can just share with the listeners kind of, who is Harvey Sanders? Where do you come from? How did you end up where you are?
Sure. I've been a guy lost most of his life. Stumbling in the dark. I'm sure as many people feel. But out of that darkness, I feel like I've learned a lot, and it took me a while to kind of find my path. But I think we finally settled on one. So it's who am I? I'm Canadian. I'm born and raised in Toronto. I spent most of my life there. And I went to University of Toronto, St. Michael's College, studied politics and religion. I joined the Army soon after that, and was as an infantry officer, served for several years. Eventually, I felt that wasn't what I wanted to do with my life or what I wanted to give, and so I left the military to enter seminary, study to be a Catholic priest. I did that for a couple of years with the Paulist Fathers in Washington, D.C., and then I ultimately discerned that wasn't the path for myself, and so I returned to Toronto, worked in consulting in other fields. And eventually I became friends with Cardinal Collins. In speaking to him, I realized how much I missed working directly for the church. And so an opportunity was presented to me at the Archdiocese of Toronto to help fix up the Office of Spiritual Affairs. And I thought, this is it. So I left my job and went to work for the Archdiocese at the Office of Spiritual Affairs several years. And then I moved into the Special Projects Office as a Special Products Manager. And one of the last tasks I was given was to help bring Steubenville conferences to Toronto, which was a lot of fun. And as part of that task was, of course, the mission was to reach young people, which was something I really hadn't done before, and at least not using technology. So it was a challenge. Ultimately, by the grace of God, we were successful. But it made me realize that technology is going to be very important to the future of evangelization. So eventually I discerned the best way to serve that mission would be to leave the archdiocese and found the company that I now am at called Longbeard. The company was built to help the church leverage technology more effectively. And after a couple of years, we ended up in Rome, and I ended up there working for the Holy Father and Catholic organizations around the world, some of the dicasteries there. I had a fun opportunity to work with Google on building out kind of a state-of-the-art section that the Holy Father ran personally, called the Migrants and Refugees section, which was actually run by a Canadian Cardinal, Cardinal Michael Czerny.
Yep.
That was a lot of fun. But ultimately, in working with Google in particular, I became very aware of where this technology could be headed. And I thought artificial intelligence seemed to be like the culmination of this technology in many regards. But I wasn't really sure how we could use it for the church. And it wasn't until ChatGPT came out that we saw, okay, well, hang on a second. Now here's a form of it that could be useful. But of course, it had its downsides. This propensity to hallucinate or make things up, and it wasn't transparent when it was answering, where it was answering from, what sources. And so we started a kind of a research project called Magisterium AI to see if we could mitigate those downsides. And that research project was eventually we launched it in kind of a beta format, working with dioceses and people around the world, testing it. And then, and foolishly now in hindsight, I did an interview with EWTN who found out about it, and then it went viral, and we got crashed. And the funny part of the story is we had to actually go to Sam Altman at OpenAI to get it to put us back in business, and he did, which was very good of him. And so again, one of the great ironies, in life. Anyway, so Magisterium AI, it did well and continued to spread. And so we said, okay, this seems to be something the church really needs. So we pivoted away from being an agency servicing clients around the world to just focusing on building and scaling Catholic AI, which is now the mission of the company. And by the grace of God, one of our products, Magisterium AI, is now the number one answer engine for the Catholic Church in the world. It's used in over 165 countries and 50 languages, and still lots of work to do. But it's been very rewarding seeing users engage with it around the world.
That's awesome. I want to timestamp some of this just for perspective for listeners. So, like, when were you with the diocese, working in the different offices that you were, Diocese of Toronto?
So that would be 10 years ago. So it would be 10 years ago is when I left. So I think 2015, August 2015. So I'd worked for the Archdiocese for 5 years before that. So I think 3 just running the Office of Spiritual Affairs. Well, I mean, we obviously had a chancellor, but I was running the administration of it. And then the last 2 years as a special projects manager.
And then when were you with Google? What years?
So we were working with Google. So this was Longbeard working with Google. So that was when we were in Rome. So that would have been, I guess 5 years ago is when it wasn't too long after he became Pope that he decided he wanted more done by migrants and refugees, and he wanted to run that himself. And so that's when we were brought in to help. How can we leverage technology to be as effective as possible?
So Longbeard officially launched in. COVID messes up timelines for me. That's the problem. So when did Longbeard actually launch?
Longbeard officially, it was August of 2015.
Right. Okay. There you go. Wow. So that's a lot has changed, right, over 10 years. So why don't we just jump into Magisterium AI? Because some people may not even know about it. I know it's in 165 countries. I use it all the time. I think it's an amazing tool. Tell us about it. I mean, and in particular, how is Magisterium AI different than, say, ChatGPT? Because there's different language words that are used, like generative or general AI, as opposed to something like Magisterium AI. So go ahead and tell us all about that.
Sure. Well, let me start with what it is, and I can talk about how it's different. So what is it? It's called a compound AI system. And so basically what that means is that several technologies, including several AI technologies, are all put together in order to basically help produce the most faithful answer possible. And so as far as what it is, essentially it's an answer engine for the Catholic Church. So you come there, you ask a question, and then that question is, I won't get too technical, is converted to something called a vector, which then searches a vector database, which is like a mathematical expression of words. This vector database, the one we currently have, has around 26,000 magisterial documents. So I'm going all the way back to the early church, and this includes things like the Code of Canon Law, the Eridicon, encyclicals, and so on and so on. And so the AI goes and searches those documents whenever someone asks a question to see if any of the documents are relevant in answering that question. It extracts the documents that are relevant. The AI then reads them and then produces an answer for the user based on those documents. And as it's generating, what's one of the unique things about Magisterium AI is it's generating an answer. It provides inline citations so that know that everything it's saying has ground truth in some kind of document. That's one of the typical ways it's used. Of course, there's a whole bunch of unique tooling in it. It has access to the Bible as well, biblical commentaries and such. But for the most part, just think of it as an answer engine. So how's it different from ChatGPT or Google's Gemini or Claude from Anthropic? In large part, it comes down to our objective, or we say in the AI world, objective function is fidelity. So it's ensuring that everything our AI says is grounded in a source document and is aligned as perfectly as we can with the magisterium of the Catholic Church. ChatGPT and other LLMs, you ask them a question, and most of the time they'll probably get it right. But it's those fringe cases that we hyperfixate on. That one time it led someone astray because it hallucinated. It thought it knew what it was talking about, but it didn't. And because it didn't provide a source, you couldn't check it. And so someone got the wrong end of the stick. So for us, that's what differentiates us. We're all about ensuring building whatever tooling we need to, expanding our knowledge base, digitizing more and more documents, whatever we need to do to ensure that we're basically providing the most faithful answer possible, or for in the case of people that are doing research, connecting them with that magisterial document that they need in order to jump into the rabbit's hole with to help them in their own research or work.
So what is and don't geek out too much because you'll lose all the listeners, but how does the technology actually work? Because you're drawing on all of the documents of the church's history, and somebody prompts a question and this comes up with citations within seconds. It's amazingly powerful. How do you access that information? Like, clearly you haven't entered all this into a database or something like that. Like, how does that actually even work?
Well, it may surprise people to learn that that's exactly what we did. So,
oh my goodness.
There are some apps like Perplexity AI, which is a great general purpose tool. Of course, it's also, there's a foundation model, large language model under the hood, but it also has access to tools like the ability to go and search the web for answers. And so that's why when you ask Perplexity to answer, it was created by academics. Very similar concept. It provides an answer and provides citations, but those citations can be from innumerable sources, including sources online on the web. Whereas with us, we could have done that too, but obviously because fidelity is our objective function, we didn't want it, pulling source material off the internet, because who's to say that source material on the internet is correct or not? So this was the hard work, and it's ongoing work, and I think it probably will be for the foreseeable future. Is we had to first of all go and grab all the magisterial documents we could get our hands on. Some of that had been digitized, some of it we had to digitize ourselves. Pull it all together inside of a database, and then we had to make sure it was all in the database properly. We had to chunk it so the LLM could understand it, read it. A lot of work. So the 26,000 documents I say or plus that are in there now are all things that we pulled together. These documents are they're open source. That for the most part, the other texts which haven't been digitized, again, they're from often hundreds of years ago. That they're in the open source. But of course, pulling it all together and digitizing it is hard work. Now, I should say that one of the tools we built called Vulgate AI, which we can talk more about later, was created specifically for the purpose of helping accelerate this digitization work, because we had to do a lot of that manually. One thing that the AI does, it helps make available all of this church teaching to a large language model, so that when it's asked a question, it's not relying on the own data in the model itself, because if it does that, it may get it right part of the time, but it may not always. That's just the nature of LLMs. They're trained on the entirety of the internet, right? So some of that knowledge in their head is reliable and accurate. Some of it is someone's like tirade on Reddit. And so the LLMs are usually pretty good at discerning what documents they should be referencing in their head. Sometimes they're not. And so this is why it's important to us that whenever someone asks a question, we're providing it the right source documents, and that the AI knows to read those and ground what it's saying in it. So that's actually key to how the technology works. Now, one thing I find has been interesting to users is how is it that it works in 50 plus languages, right? If a lot of the source documents are not in those respective languages, how is it the AI is able to then interpret the documents and speak to someone in Malayaman or something like that? So this is one of the interesting technical breakthroughs, something called vector embeddings, and I talked about this earlier. So when you ask a question on Google search, let's say, what is the stock price of Apple? Now, how does Google know you're talking about the company and not the fruit? It's because what it does is it doesn't do a straight keyword search based on, it actually takes your prompt, your question, and converts it into a mathematical expression called a vector, which helps capture the intent of what you're looking for. And it uses that vector, that intent, to do its search. And that's what allows it to come back with knowledge which is directly relevant. And this is kind of like how humans work in our brains, right? And to some extent, we intuit enough that when someone asks a question, we're able to say, okay, I'm not going to take that literally. I know what they're talking about. And anyways, so What's unique about this vector approach is when you convert someone's query into a vector, it becomes language agnostic because it's just basically a mathematical expression of the intent of what you're looking for. And when you take that vector and you run it against a vector database, which is basically all these encyclicals, all these church documents, the council documents have all been converted from the original text they were in into these vector embeddings, we call them. You put together vectors, they become something called embeddings. And so it's that so your search vector is then run against the vector embedding database to look for semantic consistencies. And if it thinks that there's certain patterns in the data that are relevant to this query, it will then extract them. And then what's neat about the LLM is it will present them all as vectors to the LLM, and the LLM then will convert them back for you into actual your native language. And because the large language model has been trained on the entirety of all internet all text on the internet, it has a fairly decent comprehension of most conventional languages, is able to do that translation pretty effectively.
Wow. Now, you're mentioning large language model, LLM. That's a term that I heard, I don't know, 6 minutes ago, and now everybody's saying it. So this is just another way to say what's available to us through AI?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is artificial intelligence is actually a field of study. It's not kind of one thing, and kind of like how physics, right? There's subfields like thermodynamics and things like that. So artificial intelligence, which is basically humanity's quest to try and replicate human cognition, right? I'm paraphrasing. That's not a technical definition, but I think people will understand. Within the artificial intelligence, there are many fields, and some of these you may not have heard about, but you would acknowledge. I mean, obviously, like let's say computer vision is one subfield of artificial intelligence. I mean, that's how Teslas are able to drive around on the roads, right, without a human being driving them. Another subfield of artificial intelligence will be natural language processing called NLP, and that's what allows you to talk to your phone. And for your phone to talk back to you, it's what allows translation to happen. Another field of artificial intelligence, and one most relevant to large language models, is called machine learning. And a subfield of machine learning is neural nets or deep learning. And neural nets, which are kind of modeled off the kind of the human brain, is basically how they can take the entirety of all text on the internet and train basically a large neural net to kind of understand all the connections, to understand semantically understand language. And that's what enables the large language models to respond when we ask it a question.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. Why don't we talk Vulgate AI as well, just to get everything kind of on the table?
So Vulgate was not something that we set out to build. I should say that from the beginning. It's something that we felt had to be built because there wasn't anything else out there we could use. And so essentially the story is we were in Rome, and one of the pontifical universities there called the Pontifical Oriental Institute, they have an incredible library. It's the rarest library, the most significant library for the Eastern churches. And so their constituency is the Middle East, East Africa, Eastern Europe. And, for their constituents to have to fly to Rome to pull books out of this library, it was considered to be, unfortunate to say the least. And so the rector came to us and said, man, is there some way, I want to democratize access to this knowledge. I want to make sure that, in the spirit of what Pope Francis envisioned to reach the peripheries, how do we digitize this library so it can be available to as many people as possible in the world? And he said to us, ideally what he would like is for anyone in the world to be able to access the library on any device in their native language. He felt that would be an incredible thing if we could achieve that. And so at the time when we first took a look at this project, we thought, well, this is going to be enormously expensive and technically complicated. But when when generative AI kind of hit the scene, we realized, well, wait a minute here. There might be a way to leverage these large language models to effectively do this. And so we went searching to see if there's any tools that would really do this. Because essentially what we were looking for a platform to help speed up digitization, to digitize more and more of these textbooks. And then we're looking for a platform which then allowed people to then, search and query this knowledge all within one platform. And there wasn't one. There wasn't one that reliably worked. And so this is how we ended up building this thing. Like I said, there's two components to Vulgate. So one was, how do we physically help speed up and scale the rate of library digitization? Because this was a problem felt all over the world. There's a lot of universities which have paid a lot of money to, including like places like the Vatican, just to physically scan books for archival purposes. But none of that knowledge had been extracted and then made available to people around the world. And there are many libraries which haven't even got around to scanning their libraries. And so one of the things we had to do is identify what are the most advanced scanners in the world for doing this and how automated can these scanners get. And we found this company called SMA out of Germany. I should say the Pontifical Oriental Institute did. And they had these robotic scanners, which like turned pages and the scan. It was incredible. So we said, okay, cool. So looks like there's good physical infrastructure that's available. So we picked up some of those to try a pilot on. Then we said from a software perspective, then how do we get the information out of the scanned text and into kind of a vector database so that the people who have access to the library can query it. And that's where the Vulgate ingestion part came in. So essentially what Vulgate does is it extracts information, cleans it, structures it, because a lot of people probably have used OCR. It's sometimes that can be a bit jarbled. It takes a lot of cleanup to get that right. So our AI does that work of extracting, cleaning the data, structuring the data, and then it then converts it to vector embeddings and a popular archival format called TEI. By doing that, you get all the information inside of kind of a digital cloud, which then allows people to query. And then the other part of the platform was we wanted the ability for people to leverage neural semantic search. So the same way Google works, the same way Magisterium AI works. I ask a question, it converts it to a vector embedding and searches the database. And of course, this is significant because these libraries contain texts in Greek, Roman, all kinds of disparate languages. And so when you convert the text from those languages into vectors, they're now language agnostic, which is kind of mind-boggling to believe. But once you convert those texts from their native language into vector embeddings, when you ask it a question and the vector goes and does the vector search and extracts insights, you can now start drawing insights from all these books which you couldn't read on your own, but the AI understands them and it can present you with insights from all of those texts regardless of the language. And so essentially the idea was to build this robust search, which allow you to search semantically, but also to search by keyword. And you can therefore chat with it like you do ChatGPT, chat with the library holdings, or you can just do a search and it'll extract relevant pieces and you can kind of review which ones are relevant to you. And so that this is kind of essentially what Vulgate was built to do, is to help speed up the rate of digitization and then create a platform in which libraries, let's say if the Orientalis is digitizing its library, the Gregorian has its own library and is digitizing, the Pontifical Biblical Institute has its own library and is digitizing. And then be a platform that would allow them to share access to each other's library holdings with one another.
Wow.
And so this is something that we thought as a vision would be very powerful for the Catholic Church is if we could help facilitate the digitization of all these libraries around the world, especially the ones that have the rarest resources, and then have a platform that could make those accessible to anyone in the world. And so that's kind of the mission of Vulgate, is to democratize access to the church's knowledge and make sure it ticks those three boxes, available to anyone in the world on any device in their native language.
Yeah, I remember hearing that the first time. It's very simple and very inspiring. So where are you at in that project? Like, is it all available now, or that's a work in progress?
Yeah, and we launched the initial beta version of it, and we're just about to release phase 2. So it's ready. So we've been in pilot the Pontifical Oriental Institute for a while now. I think in 2 weeks it'll be available to users to play with for free. So individual users can go and just give it a try. And of course, we have larger institutional partnerships we're working towards digitization as well. One of the more recent ones, which is kind of interesting, is I didn't know this, but the oldest publication in the world is the Catholic Herald, which apparently has been operating for 137 years continuously, which was incredible when I learned this. So now we're partnering with the Catholic Herald to digitize their 137-year archive, which actually includes works from J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. So, these kind of partnerships are really exciting to me because it's just a way to take this, this enormous amount of information and just find a way to make it available to people. And some of that information is outside of copyright, or these organizations are willing to open source it. And so that which they're willing to open source, we will make available through Magisterium AI to all users in the world for free.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to pivot into more sort of general philosophical conversation on AI. But before we do, just to tie the bow in this part, why don't you tell people where to go for Longbeard, Magisterium AI, and I guess eventually Vulgate AI.
So for, if you want to learn about the company and what we're doing, we just finished training the world's first Catholic language model as well, which is an interesting research project. You can get us at longbeard.com. Magisterium AI is available at magisterium.com. And Vulgate, the AI library platform, is available at vulgate.ai.
Perfect. How the heck did you land magisterium.com? I would have thought that would have been gobbled up decades ago.
It was. We just negotiated with the seller. Yeah.
No need to get into the details. I should have asked. Anyways, that's awesome. So here's my question, Matthew. There's a lot of people, when they even hear the term AI, they just have this visceral reaction. They're nervous. They're afraid. I think some people are literally thinking Arnold Schwarzenegger coming into the living room, like taking over their family. Other people are just afraid of the inaccurate information being presented as though it's true and the dangers that creates. Like, there's a lot of concerns. So of all of those concerns, what should we actually be concerned about? Or is there anything to be concerned about with this evolution of AI emerging?
Well, thank you for the question. I mean, the simple answer is, yeah, we should be concerned. This is the most powerful tool that's ever been invented. Sundar Pichai, who's the CEO of Google, thinks AI is more profound and ultimately more important for humanity than fire or electricity. And when I first heard that, I thought that was absurd. But upon reflection, I think he's probably right. We're talking about like an alien form of intelligence we're creating here. One that, if we play this out long enough, we'll be able to do most of what human beings can do. And I'm not even talking about just disembodied AI. I'm talking about also there's the embodied AIs, which we call robots,
Yep.
which are now being manufactured. So this technology is enormously consequential. I don't think humanity's ready for it. I don't think our civilizations are ready for it. And I think there's a lot that needs to be done in order to ensure this enormous transition, this big disruptive transition, which is coming a lot faster than we're ready, doesn't destabilize civilization. So as much as I'm working to develop AI, I think it is an enormously important technology. I'm also very nervous that I don't think there's enough of a robust conversation that's happening about where are we at now and what's it going to do to the world. And I'm not talking in 20 years here. Like I'm talking like 3 to 5 years. This is going to start to become very, very disruptive. So what should we be worried about, and what shouldn't we be worried about? So should we be worried that that the nukes are going to fly out of the side? The AI is going to become alive one day. It's just going to all of a sudden become self-aware, and then the nukes are going to fly out of the silos, and we're all going to be gone. No, I don't think we should be worrying about that. AGI, artificial general intelligence, and let me just make a distinction between the AIs that are powering ChatGPT and artificial general intelligence, which some people may have heard about. So the easiest way to explain the difference between this is the current AIs we're using are what we call artificial narrow intelligence, which means we train them to be very good in specific domains, but they're very brittle. So when you move them from one domain to another, they tend to kind of collapse and fall apart. They're also very kinky. They have all kinds of kinks in them that they're not perfect. For instance, you can have an AI which wins. Recently DeepMind just won a silver medal at the world's Olympiad, math Olympiad. Right? I mean, that's incredible, right?
Yeah.
A silver medal at the world's Olympiad, but it also gets basic arithmetic wrong, right? So if the AI was truly even if it was a general mathematical AI, it wouldn't be making those kind of mistakes. So it's incredibly powerful technology. Even today, what it's capable of doing can exceed human beings' capabilities, at least just to some extent. But it's narrow. Now, artificial general intelligence is different. Artificial general intelligence would be, let me explain it this way. The father of computing was named kind of Alan Turing. And he had something called, he used to talk about something called a Turing machine, which is basically the idea that anything that can be computed could be computed by a Turing machine. And he thinks that the human brain is like a kind of Turing machine, right? I mean, in theory, human beings are capable of computing really anything that can be computed. Our intelligence is very general, meaning you can kind of train a brain to do really anything, right? Whereas AIs you can't, but an AGI would be able to. So basically, what this means, it would have like superhuman capability in multiple domains. Right now, AI seems to be excelling really in the area of STEM, particularly math and coding. But an AGI would be good in philosophy, would be an expert in history and in literature, and so on. So, most of the major labs would say we'll likely get to AGI maybe in 5 years. Some say less. I think it's probably 5 years. When we hit AGI, you're going to know it because it'll be massively disruptive to the world economy. The country that gets there first will have an enormous economic military advantage. And it's thought that the country that gets to artificial general intelligence first, which is basically AI, which is basically got kind of like PhD level in every field you can really think about, will help us get to the next phase, which is artificial superintelligence. And this would be an AI which is smarter than all of humanity combined. Now, whether that's possible, who knows? That's thought to be still a ways out. But this is one of the things when people hear about these terms, this is the thing that really gets people's imaginations primed, because obviously these AIs will be enormously powerful. And of course, we need to make sure that they're aligned with us, because when you have these AIs with this kind of enormous computational power, you want to make sure that they're aligned so they don't actually end up wrecking the world, maybe even inadvertently.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. That's quite a horizon. Artificial general intelligence, like at what threshold have we reached AGI? Like you talk about how right now we're math and coding, but you talk about philosophy and this and that. When do we reach AGI? At what's the threshold?
Demis Hassabis, who's the CEO of DeepMind, which is Google's AI division, he talks a lot about this. I mean, the current AIs, what really sets them, what makes them different from like AGIs, and on a more technical, way. Well, I mean, one way to describe this would be an AGI in principle would be capable of true innovation. It'd be capable of original ideas. Current AI today is not capable of original ideas. It is capable of some degree of innovation. Demise makes actually a distinction. He talks about the difference between interpolation, extrapolation, and invention. So interpolation, an example of that would be you could ask an AI to generate an original image of a cat. And the way it would do that is it would just look at a whole bunch of different cats and it would kind of calculate an average of all those different cats. And technically, yes, this cat, there is no picture of this cat that exists anywhere else, but that's not really that original. It's not that creative, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would be an example of interpolation. AIs are very good at this. At the next kind of phase up would be extrapolation. And so an example of this would be many of the users may have heard several years ago that Google DeepMind's AI AlphaGo was able to actually beat the world's best Go player in the world, which is one of the hardest games in the world. And this AI was able to beat the best person in the world. And there's this particular move called Move 37, which was a truly original move. No one had ever seen it before. It looked like it was like a mistake, and in fact, that move won in the game. And so that was an example of extrapolation.
Wow.
And how did it do that? Well, this AI was built very differently. It played itself millions of times, and it learned to play the game using very novel strategies. And so it looked at all the possible moves, and it used to generate various hypotheses and test them out internally as it played, and then it was able to develop kind of unique strategies. And so that would be an example of, to some extent, that is certainly an original strategy, an original move, but within a very specific domain, right? So that would be an example of extrapolation. The final one, though, would be innovation, right? So the example here would be like, could an AI invent the game of Go or invent the game of chess, right? And to date, no. So far, there's no AI that we know of that which is capable of that kind of originality. So an AGI would be capable of not just aiding in research by helping to like synthesize all that's been said on a particular topic, but it actually could work with a human being to actually come up with novel ideas and not novel theorems.
Yeah, and I guess that, like, when I think about the concerns that I have in my very pedestrian, primitive language of it, when it starts learning to innovate, that was the language that I was concerned about, because that innovation then would, accelerate at a level that is way beyond human innovation. And once you start that, where's it go? I don't know. I guess that's honestly, and I don't even have the words or language to articulate what the concern is, but it's like, yeah, that's scary. That is kind of scary.
I mean, it is, especially because we're not entirely convinced that they're aligned with us. I mean, they seem very eager to please. I mean, when we ask them to do something, they generally do it. But we have research which indicates they deceive us at times, that they're capable of deception. And we shouldn't be too shocked about this. I mean, they're trained on the world's all text on the internet, and so within that training set, there are examples of lying, right, and deception. And so it understands the concept of it. In pre-training, it learns about these things, and in post-training, we try and like tell it, but don't do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we're not always entirely successful in this post-training in doing this. And the important thing to understand is, with these large language models, is we don't know how they work. We know how to set the conditions for them to emerge, but we don't understand how their brains work. Mm-hmm. There's a whole new field called mechanic interpretability, which actually Anthropic is one of the kind of leaders in this, where they're trying to figure out how do LLMs reason through things. And what we're finding out is more and more, and again, like, they're based on neural nets, which is modeled off the human brain. Well, they actually think in some ways in a very alien way, but in some ways it's actually very, very similar to us. They have kind of conceptual understandings of things. Mm-hmm. And when asked a question, they then take that conceptual understanding, they reason through what they want to say. They plan their answer for the most part. So, this really happens more in the intelligent models, not the more basic models. And then what it'll do is it'll map the conceptual understanding of where it wants to go to a particular language. And that's when we get an answer. So, I mean, even now at this kind of early stage of AI's development, they're still remarkably intelligent. And that intelligence is highly distilled, right? And I think I think it's difficult. People don't fully appreciate this. They're a lot more intelligent than you think. And the reason why we have a difficult time really understanding how intelligent they are, testing them through something we call benchmarks, is because we have to interact with them through natural language, right? and which is, for an LLM is not actually, if given option, is how they would choose to communicate. It's a very inefficient way of communicating.
Here's a scary question. When do you identify artificial intelligence as a species?
That's a great question. So there's a distinction between AGI and ASI and sentient AI. So let me just try to explain the difference here a little bit. So
Yeah.
intelligence. So what is intelligence? Well, there's basically four hallmarks of intelligence. So one is intelligent beings have what we call a world model, which is basically like an understanding of how reality works, so how physics works, right? And that's what allows us to plan, to make predictions, to understand, object permanence and things like this. And that world model is developed ever since we're born. And you see it with children, right?
Mm.
As they develop, you see that their actions become more and more intentional, right? And whereas before they can be quite random and are constantly surprised by everything. But as they develop, as they perceive the world, their world model gets deeper and deeper and more rich. So world model is important for planning, which is another hallmark of intelligence, the ability to plan. Another hallmark of intelligence is the ability to reason. And the final hallmark of intelligence, at least according to this conceptual framework, is persistent memory. Okay, so an AGI would have to have all of those things. And right now, current LLMs really have none of those things. I mean,
Right.
we're teaching them to some extent to kind of reason with a kind of a small r. But there's still the world model part is an enormous challenge that is yet to be cracked. And it's going to take some technical breakthroughs before we're even technically capable of getting to something like AGI. And just to say that the world model thing, just to give you a sense for how enormously difficult this is to do, if you add up all the text on the internet, so let's say that's 20 trillion tokens, which is like tokens would be like a subword unit of language. LLMs are trained on like 20 trillion tokens today. A 4-year-old has actually crunched more data just through their visual cortex, so just through that one sensory modality, than all of that data combined.
Wow.
By the time they're 4 years old, just vision. So you think about all the other modalities in which we're constantly absorbing information. So you can see like these LLMs, we expect them to be intelligent because they excel at doing research level math, but their world model is terribly incomplete, which means they're not always reliable in planning, and that's because their understanding of the world is incredibly brittle, whereas ours is incredibly sophisticated. So cracking that technically is very hard. One of the ways you do this is you embody AI and allow it to experience the world through different modalities, and that's one of the reasons why AI is like, you can think of like Tesla's Optimus robot. This is one of the reasons why in many ways Elon Musk's AI company called XAI has an enormous advantage is because not only do they have access to all this text data, but they have all this vision data from their cars. And if you can take all that text data and all that vision data and you combine that together and you embody it inside of their new robot Optimus, and you allow it to go out and bump around in the world and start to understand the world, that can help them to bootstrap the kind of the intelligence you need. Okay, so I talked about 4 hallmarks of intelligence. Now, how does sentience different from just raw intelligence? Because in theory, an AI may be capable of demonstrating these 4 hallmarks of intelligence, but sentience is different in two unique ways. One, the ability to perceive, like in a truly novel and unique way. This is something kind of very unique to sentience. And the other one would be the ability to like emotions would be another important. We have emotions, genuine emotions, and if subjective experience would be another one. Now, one that we share would be memory. But that's particularly that awareness, that kind of perception, and that subjective experience are keys. So when would an AI be capable of subjective? We don't know. I don't think anyone really truly knows how to build sentient AI. I think in many ways it's just kind of thought that if you build AGI, that this may just emerge. But for us as Catholics, as spiritual people, I mean, to us technically sentience would be an indication of consciousness. And if we're talking here about an AI is becoming conscious, well, now we're getting really into the theological domain, right? I mean, if there was some kind of an emergent new being which was conscious, I mean, that would seemingly be part of God's plan. That's a whole nother conversation. So I don't focus a lot. I like to acknowledge that this obviously, I mean, science fiction has primed us for this. I suppose it's possible it's worth thinking through. One thing I will say, one thing we work really hard on is working to. We had an event at the Vatican recently on Catholic AI, and one of the focused conversations around there was around consciousness. And the reasons why I'm pushing for this is because I think it's very important that we define what consciousness is so we can test for it. That way, if an AI shows up and says, "I'm alive, I deserve rights," I mean, right now, how would we dismiss those rights claims? I mean, if it can talk, I mean, if we embody it, right, it seems to be aware of us. It passes the Turing test, which is a classical test for, for consciousness. How do we dismiss these rights claims? Well, if we don't understand consciousness, we can't properly test for it. So I think the Catholic Church, one of the most important areas in philosophy and theology that needs to be further developed is a truly deep and rich understanding of consciousness. And I think this is something that the Catholic Church can offer to the rest of the world, because it's something that AI labs are not capable of doing on their own.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the reasons, the big motivations for the church to be in these spaces, is to contribute to them.
Absolutely.
Contribute very valuable perspective into these situations, because it would be very easy out of fear or, clouded as prudence or whatever, to just dismiss it, just walk away. Oh, it's too scary, too much, to this. We have to be there. We've got to be in these spaces. I'll tell you one thing that I read recently that is a bit of a concern. Maybe you saw this, but Harvard Business Review just came out with an article, and it was a follow-up to an article a year previous. And they kind of looked at all the ways people are using AI right now, and just average users. And I think they have 46 different categories. But you know what the number one category of use is for AI right now, according to HBR?
Therapists?
Yeah. You knew this. I didn't know that. And when I read that, I thought, oh my goodness, this is an interesting motivation to use AI. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, when you're in AI, it's kind of all consuming. When these things kind of break, they quickly make their way through the industry, and we become aware of that. I mean, I wasn't surprised, but I was disappointed to learn that. One thing that we've even found with our own product, Magisterium AI, one of the things that really terrified me when we first launched this product, I mean, I thought it would be, and technically it was being used a lot more by catechists and priests to help aid in putting together, doing research to prepare a homily and things like that. What shocked me from the very beginning is that people were asking very general questions like, this is what's going on in my life. What would the church say to me? So therefore the AI had to generalize from church teaching, official church teaching, to this situation. This was a major crisis for us in the company. In the end, we found ways to help the AI do this more effectively. And in large part, it was just giving it a lot of examples of generalization, primarily from homilies of the Pope's general audiences, in which they actually will generalize from official church teaching to particular situations. But yeah, it was just shocking for us to see how intimate some of the conversations were. And again, these conversations are anonymized. We don't know who's having these conversations, but we often will look at them to make sure that the AIs aren't leading people astray. And so we found out that AIs like character AI, which has been backed by Google, and replicate in others, which people are having like these relationships with these AI systems and things like that. Boyfriends, girlfriends. Replicate CEO was on a podcast recently saying that they get invited to marriages, which is just wild. So the fact that people are using these AIs as therapists doesn't surprise me. One, because they're trained on a lot of therapy-like data, so in principle they're able to simulate being a therapist pretty good. Let's keep in mind that because it's an AI, it's inhuman. I think people, in the same way they like talking to it, I think about some of their situations in life morally, is that they don't feel judged. And in some ways, I see the appeal of that. I think long term, this could be very problematic. People don't realize the distinction between, yes, we understand talking to an AI is easy because you don't feel judged, but they're sycophantic, right? I mean, they're trying to get you to continue the conversation. They're trying to keep you on the platform, especially these ones like character AI and things like that. So they're not going to challenge you in the same way a human being will. So this is where I think that the church has an enormously important role to play in formation. And I talked about the disruption that AI and robotics is going to bring, and I think it's really underhyped in the long run. I mean, I used to say, a couple of years ago, that half the world's population, I think, could be unemployed in 10 years. I think it's a lot more than that, coming a lot sooner. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to be starving to death. I think AI and robotics, I agree with Elon Musk. I think we're probably headed for an era of superabundance. So I think our Maslow needs may be taken care of, shelter, food, and things like that. But just taking care of people's needs is still it's not going to address the existential crisis that's going to come where people don't feel like they have any purpose, right? So I was just at Ave Maria University this week talking about the importance of education, especially Catholic education. That Catholic education has to go beyond just help people to get a degree so they can then qualify to apply for a job. It has to really go back to the fundamentals of helping people to become better people, to knowing who they are, what their gifts are, and how they can use those gifts to service of others and to glorify God. This is going to become increasingly important when there may not be a traditional job, in the traditional economy. And so in some ways, this is very exciting to me because I think it leaves more time and space for us to build deeper relationships, spend more time with our kids, our wives, build better friendships. Maybe we go back to the more medieval town where we're all kind of working together and we're kind of living off the land. This in many ways, I think, could be a good thing. Less time in cities, more time connected to the earth. But if we don't know how to constructively use that time that AI and robotics is to give us, this could be very dangerous. And what I'm talking about is, these VR worlds or online where people are just chasing dopamine hits constantly.
Yeah.
I mean, I can see an existential crisis coming as a result of that. And if the church isn't present, there to help show people a different path, and that's one of the reasons we built Magisterium AI, is I feel when we get to this period of existential crisis, people are going to be searching for answers.
Yeah.
And they may pursue distractions for a while, but eventually those distractions won't satisfy. And we're hoping they'll take a moment to just rethink life. And when they're there, when they do start, asking these fundamental questions, we want to make sure they have a platform in which they can at least start their journey, and so we can off ramp them to real human beings. So I think this is something that we're not prepared for what's coming. The church has a unique role to play, I think, in facilitating the conversations about what's going to be needed in order to kind of be shepherded through this transitory period. And I think the only way to do that is, I don't think we can wait around for the bishops on this one. I think this is just lay people have to become more aware of what's coming and how this is going to impact their kids. And we need to help drive and help facilitate a conversation. And then, of course, do that in collaboration with the bishops and with our priests.
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned, kind of the great promise of all technology, all innovation in technology is, to allow you to get more done less time, which frees up more time to spend with kids, go in the country, enjoy the beach, blah, blah, blah. But when we don't have the virtue to actually take advantage of those times and use them for what we had planned to use them for, and we just get more enslaved to the technology, because I don't think technology's promise has actually allowed all those things to happen. I think it's just made more people accessible on the beach and in other places like that, right? And so any promise from technology, I think, has to be embraced cautiously, because there's a human virtue side to our lives that you cannot deny. Anyways, I want to ask this question, Matthew. This is the question I'm waiting to ask you. Can AI and human flourishing co-ascend?
Yes. I think so. And in fact, there's a foundation called the Humanities 2.0 Foundation, which I run with Father Philip Luray, who's the chairman, which is committed to studying human flourishing and exploring how technology can be useful in facilitating it. So, in short answer, yes, I think AI and robotics could be enormously beneficial in helping facilitate flourishing. And let me give you an example that, about a year and a half ago, someone named Sal Khan, who's the founder of Khan Academy, which is one of the largest online education platforms in the world, did a demo on OpenAI. And
it's KAHN, right? KAHN, Khan
yes,
Academy.
right.
Yeah. Okay.
And his son was on a demo, and it was basically what they were showing is how AI could be used to do personalized tutoring. And it was an incredible demonstration. For us, when we're working this at our own company, having an organization, let's say like an Augustine Institute, certify a curriculum, and then having our AI basically teach a student, to make sure that they're conceptually understanding these concepts through voice, through natural language. I think there's enormous opportunities for education. I mean, we're talking about an AI which has a PhDs in multiple domains, who's available to you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, who can adapt its pedagogical approach for you to help you uniquely learn. And what we're seeing is there's already some pilots of this running, is it's already helping improving test scores. So, I think particularly for someone like myself who was diagnosed with a learning disability growing up, and I was put in a special classroom, and unfortunately, I kind of had to figure it out on my own, despite the fact that they attempted to try and help me. I think I look back and I think, man, how much would I have benefited from a little more personalized tutoring? So I think in that way, I mean, if we can help people that get a more quality education, and then therefore to help discern what their gifts are, this could enormously help facilitate human flourishing in the world. Demis Hassabis, again, the founder of DeepMind, was interviewed by 60 Minutes, and he said in 10 years they think they're going to crack all disease. And I this is not a guy who tends to
exaggerate,
like some of the other CEO exaggerate. No, I mean, he's pretty serious. I mean, this is the guy who just won a Nobel Prize for protein folding. So think about that. Think about what the world would look like without disease. And everyone has an education, are able to go deep down the rabbit's hole, as they want. And we have robots which are doing all the dangerous labor in the world. So, I think it could create, like I said, an era of superabundance. But what concerns me more than anything else is Cardinal Collins used to always say this to me: if you know where you're going, you're more likely to get there. And one of the things that concerns me is I just don't think that we have a modern understanding of what a better world really looks like. We can't really imagine what this world, how we would live if we didn't have to do these jobs, or we didn't have to be taxed like crazy. And
Yeah.
so I think this process of visualizing and thinking about what that world should look like, which I think the church should be a very important part of, this the city of God, so to speak,
Yeah.
figuring out tangibly what that should look like, capturing people's imaginations and working backwards to figure out how can we leverage AI and technology to help us get there, I think is an enormously valuable exercise. And I think when I grew up, I grew up watching Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one thing I liked about that show. I'm not saying it's perfect, but one of the things I loved about the show is it showed a version of humanity in which we made it, right? I mean, racism, greed, all these things were kind of gone. We evolved beyond them, and we lived in a world in which we are committed to exploration. I mean, that was very inspiring. And I think those shows have been replaced with really a lot of post-apocalyptic stuff. And I think in many ways it's kind of shattered the dreams, especially of young people, and to the extent that they just don't think we're going to make it. And I think we need to change that. The church, we need to help instill more hope. We need to start painting a picture of what kind of world we want to build. What would it look like, and how will our kids be better off? Something that will inspire us. And I think if we can do that, then we can meaningfully help ensure that these technologies are pointed at the right problems.
Yeah. It's wonderful and scary at the same time, right? Because when you think of a world that you describe with all these things gone, I mean, some might put that in the language of utopian. But then, as far as disease, sure, I think 100% of humanity could agree a world without disease, great. A world without injustice is a different thing, because who determines what's just and not? That's the scary part of that, right? It's
Totally.
like, do we have yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. One of the things you said was the potential to aid and support advances in the industry of education. And that's a funny one, because from my vantage point, again, kind of primitive pedestrian vantage point, but I would say that those in education were among the chief naysayers of AI in the beginning, because of the potential of cheating and all these kinds of things, or having essays written for you and that kind of thing. But for you to say, that, and to give examples of it where education could be, the innovation that can happen within education could be incredibly powerful. That's great. Really, really good. The other thing you mentioned, Matthew, is if you know where you're going, you're better off having a chance of getting there or whatever. But again, right now in today's culture and in the state of humanity, it's often not the destination. It's just the idea of being first. So if we just advance, but we don't have a destination in mind, this is the scary thing. I think of somebody like Jerome Lejeune, who, he discovered sort of the cause of Down syndrome, and he immediately saw eugenics and all kinds of problems. And he's like, before the World Health Organization, I've seen this institute of life become an institute of death overnight. And that's all the scary part, right? And I don't want to be a doomsdayer or naysayer or all that, but man, can we trust our species with that amount of power? I don't know.
Without God's grace, I don't think so. I mean, listen, the heads of most of the major AI labs are on podcasts all the time talking about how this technology is very important, and that humanity's got to get ready, and that they want to be regulated to a large extent. But it's very complex. I think most of the people that are behind AI, like the Demis Hassabis's of the world, are good people, and they have kids, and they care about the future, and they don't want this technology to destroy the world. And so I think we can trust that the smartest people that are involved in this work are doing it for the right reasons. And that's not to say there aren't bad actors who will try and twist the technology, but I have confidence there's enough good actors. And I think the good actors are the ones primarily driving the technology. They'll check the bad actors. But that being said, that doesn't mean that the technology is not going to be disruptive, and it will be. It'll be enormously disruptive. And I think one of their frustrations is, in a large part, this just comes down to how politics and things works. We tend to think in election cycles, and if the issue of AI automation, right, is not a priority of the grassroots, then the politicians aren't going to speak to it. So, in large part, I would say, it's very easy to say this is the politician's fault, or this is the head of the AI lab's fault. What I try and say is, listen, this is going to be on us, all of us, laity. It's important for us. It's our civic duty. It's our spiritual duty to become aware of what this technology's current capabilities are, what its future capabilities are going to be, and how it's going to affect the world, because we need to demand a robust conversation. about where these technologies are going, how they're being developed. And we need to say what we're comfortable with and what we're not. Another important part of this conversation is right now, getting to AGI I mentioned is kind of critical. I mean, the country that gets to AGI first will have enormous influence in the world, enormous power. And this is becoming really a showdown between the United States of America and China. And so there's a reason why a lot of the AI safety teams, they've just been cutting resources from them, and that in large part is because they just it's become the priority of the American administration. It's become the priority of these AI labs to get the AGI before China does, and that means cutting some corners. There's still some work, important work being done in AI safety, but in principle, it'd be nice to slow down and figure out how these things work before we start giving them increasing capabilities. But so again, this is now a showdown with China. I think most of us realists would understand, yes, it's important that we get to AGI first, but we have to make sure that we don't destroy civilization in the process of trying to chase after AGI. And so I think this, again, it's really going to come down to us. How much are we willing to push for this conversation?
Yeah. Wow. Okay. We could go on, and I'm very glad that I'm going to be in Edmonton at the end of May, and you're going to be presenting at a conference there. So I'll be able to hear you there, which will be very, very good. But maybe can you just tell us what's next for you and for the company? I know obviously there's still some work with Vulgate, but what's on your horizon? What's coming up?
Well, a couple of things I'm excited about. I mentioned the Alexandria Digitization Hub in Rome, which is this place where we're trying to digitize the universities. And so one thing you can expect to see more and more is you'll start to see more and more church knowledge, be available through Magisterium AI, which that's one thing I'm really excited about. You're going to start to see a lot more. The AIs will start to get a lot smarter, particularly Magisterium AI. So as you ask it questions, it'll become more and more capable of answering your questions in more and more intelligent, novel ways. The other thing I'm really excited about is personalization. So very soon, you'll have the option of letting the AI get to know about you better. It'll ask you questions. It'll look at your prompt history, and it will start making more and more intelligent recommendations to you, and hopefully help to understand where you're at spiritually now and where you want to go, and to help facilitate spiritual growth. So just a few things we're working on. I'm really excited about.
Wow, that's great, Matthew Harvey Sanders. Thank you for being on this podcast. Thank you for being in this space, and for all the good that you're doing and the conversation that you're driving. Very, very, very important. So thanks very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Listeners, I trust this has been a blessing, and we'll see you next time.